The clinking of champagne glasses and the polite hum of conversation filled the grand ballroom of Clarence's house. It was the autumn of 1970, and a lavish party was in full swing, a gathering of the young, wealthy, and well-connected. Amidst the swirl of debutantes in their finery and young lords in their tailored suits, a tall, somewhat shy young man named Charles, the Prince of Wales, stood slightly apart from the main throng. He was used to these events, a necessary part of his life, but they often left him feeling more isolated than connected. His eyes drifted across the room, not really focusing on anyone, until they landed on a figure that made him pause. She wasn't the most conventionally beautiful woman in the room, but there was an undeniable energy about her. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a cascade of honey-colored hair catching the light. She was in the middle of an animated conversation with a group of people, her hands gesturing expressively, and this was Camilla Shand. Charles had heard her name before, of course. She moved in similar circles, known for her wit and her love of country life, but seeing her now in her element was different. There was a confidence, an easiness about her that was profoundly attractive. He found himself being introduced by a mutual friend, and the moment they shook hands, something shifted. Camilla didn't treat him like a prince. She didn't curtsy and murmur platitudes. Instead, she looked him directly in the eye and, with a mischievous glint, referenced a story about his great-uncle, a man known for his own colorful love life. "You know," she said, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur, "my grandmother knew him. She always said he was a terrible flirt." Charles was stunned. And then he laughed, a genuine, uninhibited laugh that surprised even himself. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was talking to a real person, not a subject. And their conversation flowed effortlessly for the rest of the evening. They talked about polo, about hunting, about books and art. Camilla was intelligent and well-read, able to spar with him on any topic. She had a dry, self-deprecating humor that he found enchanting. He was used to women who were either awestruck or calculatingly ambitious. Camilla was neither. She was simply herself. As the night wore on, the noise of the party seemed to fade into a distant background hum. And they were in their own little bubble, and Charles felt a lightness of being he hadn't experienced in years. He was completely captivated. When he finally said goodnight, the image of her laughing, intelligent eyes was burned into his memory. This was not just another fleeting attraction. It felt like the beginning of something profoundly important. Their courtship began in earnest. They saw each other at country weekends, at polo matches, at small dinners. Charles, who often seemed weighed down by the solemnity of his future role, was a different man around Camilla. He was relaxed, playful, and deeply affectionate. He confided in her his frustrations, his loneliness, the immense pressure of being the heir to the throne. She listened without judgment, offering not just sympathy but also witty observations that put his problems into perspective. She became his confidant, his lover, and his best friend all at once. For Camilla, though Charles was a far cry from the stuffy, aloof figure often portrayed in the press. She saw the sensitive, thoughtful, and deeply romantic man beneath the royal exterior. She was in love with him, not with the Prince of Wales. Their time together was a stolen paradise of quiet walks, intimate talks, and passionate embraces. He wrote her long, heartfelt letters, and she treasured them. To the outside world, they were just two young people enjoying a flirtation. But to themselves, and they were building a world that felt permanent and real. However, this private happiness existed against a backdrop of immense public and familial expectation. The Prince of Wales did not simply choose a wife, he chose a future queen. And from the perspective of his family, his advisors, and the establishment, Camilla Shand was not that person. The whispers started subtly, then grew louder. She had a past. She wasn't a virgin. it a seemingly non-negotiable requirement for a royal bride at the time. She enjoyed socializing and had a history of boyfriends, which was seen as a lack of the necessary decorum. More importantly, she was seen as too worldly, too knowing, and not pliable enough for the role. The institution needed a young, innocent, and malleable girl, someone who could be molded into the perfect queen. Camilla, with her independent spirit and her directness, was seen as a threat to that ideal. Lord Mountbatten, Charles's beloved great-uncle and mentor, who acted as a surrogate father, was particularly vocal. He wrote to Charles, advising him to sow his wild oats, but to choose a wife with no past who would be acceptable to everyone. The message was clear. Camilla was a wonderful companion for now, but she was not a suitable candidate for the future. The pressure was relentless, a constant dull ache in the back of Charles's mind, a poison slowly seeping into the pure joy he felt with Camilla. He was torn between the dictates of his heart and the crushing weight of his destiny. Camilla was not naive. She saw the writing on the wall. She understood the Game of Thrones far better than most gave her credit for. She knew that her lineage, her experience, and her lack of political naivety were all counts against her in the eyes of the royal court. She also saw the toll the pressure was taking on Charles, and he would be happy and carefree one moment, then withdrawn and anxious the next. A part of her began to realize that their love, as real and deep as it was, existed in a bubble that was about to burst. She began to prepare herself for the inevitable heartbreak. The final devastating blow came in the form of Andrew Parker Bowles. He was a dashing and charismatic army officer, a man firmly within the establishment, and crucially, he was someone of whom Charles's family thoroughly approved. He was safe, conventional, and respectable. Camilla had known Andrew for years, and their relationship had always been a kind of background static to her connection with Charles. But now, with the pressure on Charles mounting, Andrew began to pursue her more seriously. Feeling the walls closing in and perhaps sensing Charles's deep-seated inability to defy his family and his future, Camilla made a choice that would alter the course of all their lives. She accepted Andrew Parker Bowles's proposal of marriage. It was a decision born of heartbreak and pragmatism. She was giving Charles an out, freeing him from the impossible position she had placed him in. She was also, in a way, choosing a life that was possible over a love that was not. When Charles heard the news, it felt like a physical blow. The woman he loved, his soulmate, was going to marry another man. He was devastated, but he understood. He had been given a choice. And by his inaction, he had implicitly made it. He had chosen duty over love, or rather, he had let duty choose for him. Camilla's wedding to Andrew in 1973 marked the end of their first idyllic chapter, but the bond between them was far from broken. The years that followed were a study in quiet desperation for Charles. He did his duty. He joined the Navy, he carried out his royal engagements, and he smiled for the cameras. But a part of him remained frozen in time and tethered to the memory of Camilla. They remained friends, of course, moving in the same social circles. Andrew was a friend of Charles's, and the four of them, Charles, Camilla, Andrew, and his wife, would often be seen together at polo matches and parties. To the world, it was a perfectly normal upper-class friendship. But beneath the surface, the old feelings simmered, a low, steady flame that neither time nor separation could extinguish. For Charles, and every encounter with Camilla was a bittersweet reminder of what he had lost and a reaffirmation of the unique connection they shared. He watched her navigate her life as a young army wife, and he buried his own feelings deeper, resigned to a future that seemed increasingly lonely and devoid of the passionate companionship he craved. By the late 1970s, the pressure on the 30-year-old Prince of Wales to marry had become an almost deafening roar. The press was relentless. Every eligible young woman in Europe was scrutinized and speculated upon. His family was increasingly anxious. He needed to produce an heir and secure the line of succession. It was in this frantic atmosphere that Lady Diana Spencer entered the scene. She was young, just 19, from an aristocratic family with close ties to the royal family. She was perceived as shy, sweet, and, crucially, untouched, a virginal candidate who fit the mold Lord Mountbatten had prescribed years ago. She was everything Camilla was not: naive, inexperienced, and seemingly uncomplicated. Charles, worn down by years of emotional loneliness and the unrelenting pressure to conform, saw in Diana a solution to a problem. He was not passionately in love with her, but he liked her well enough. She was pretty and seemed kind. More importantly, she was acceptable to his family and the public. It was a decision made with his head, not his heart. A pragmatic choice designed to fulfill his duty. Yet tragically, Diana, young and romantic, interpreted his attention as genuine love. She saw the fairy tale, the prince sweeping her off her feet, completely unaware that she was stepping into a story already written, one where the lead female role had already been cast. She had no idea that the ghost of Camilla Parker Bowles would haunt her marriage from its very inception. In the feverish weeks before the royal wedding of the century, a final fateful meeting took place. Charles, perhaps seeking reassurance or a final blessing, or driven by a need he couldn't articulate, arranged to see Camilla. They met in a private setting, away from prying eyes. The conversation was intense, filled with unspoken fears and regrets. Charles, on the brink of making a decision that would define the rest of his life, seemed to be seeking an anchor in the one person who had ever truly understood him. Some accounts suggest that during this meeting, the subject of their future relationship was discussed. Charles was marrying Diana, but he was not willing to give up Camilla. He needed to know she would still be there. He needed her emotional support, even as he was about to pledge his life to another. What was said in that room is known only to them, but the implication was clear. Charles was walking down the aisle, but his heart remained elsewhere. For Camilla, this was a moment of profound complexity, and she was now a married woman with children, yet the man she had truly loved was about to marry someone else and was looking to her for reassurance. She gave it. She became the silent partner in a tragic pact, agreeing to remain in his life, a promise that would have devastating consequences for the three people at its center. This secret meeting, hidden from Diana and the world, was the foundational crack in the fairy tale, a crack that would eventually shatter the glass slipper entirely. The wedding day, July 29, 1981, was a spectacle of unparalleled joy for the nation. The streets of London were thronged with 1 million people, all cheering for their prince and his beautiful, blushing bride. The world watched as Lady Diana Spencer, in her puff-sleeved taffeta gown, walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral. It was the very definition of a fairy tale wedding. But as Charles stood at the altar, waiting for his bride, his eyes were not focused on the entrance. Now, as the newsreels and photographs would later show, his gaze swept the congregation, searching for one face. And then he found it. Camilla, wearing a gray feathered hat, stood watching the proceedings. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. In that one silent look, a world of meaning was conveyed. A goodbye, a promise, a deep and abiding connection that the pomp and ceremony of the day could not diminish. For Diana, standing at the altar, that moment would have been invisible, but the ghost of it lingered. She later recounted the feeling of being a lamb to the slaughter, a feeling that would only intensify in the years to come. The marriage was doomed from the start, built on a foundation of incompatibility, naivety, and a third person whose presence was felt from the very first moment. The fairy tale was a lie, and the look Charles gave Camilla on his wedding day was its silent confession. The world saw a prince and his princess. But in that room, in that moment, A different, far more emotional truth was playing out. A man, bound by duty, was saying a silent farewell to the woman he truly loved, even as he prepared to say "I do" to another. The shock of that choice, made years before and confirmed in that single glance, rippled through the congregation and would echo through history, a poignant and tragic testament to a love that defied convention, duty, and even marriage itself.